Welcome to the Living Water Lutheran Church Adult Forum on stewardship, a topic that just thinking about makes many of us just a bit uncomfortable. My name is Larry Carr. I'm a member here at Living Water. And while adult forums normally involve a conversation, our unusual and trying circumstances will unfortunately make today's forum a presentation. While you aren't here in the room with me this morning, I can still sense the reaction, wait a minute, it's not pledge time. Why are we talking about stewardship now? Well, be patient and maybe we'll figure that out. Those of you who attend adult forums regularly may have participated in my recent discussions titled Origins and Context of Our Faith and of the Bible. This one is different for me. Origins and context were based on my study and thinking, reading and contemplating the wisdom of others and appreciating and accepting and struggling with different theological perspectives. And I enjoyed the luxury of learned feedback and interaction with people, including those in this room. And the feedback that I got was very, very helpful and deeply appreciated. I made a point in those presentations, those discussions, to say I wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. Origins and context came from my head. Stewardship is based on my experience and doing. I served 6 years as president and CEO of the Presbyterian Church USA's foundation. It was a unique opportunity, a fulfilling opportunity to examine stewardship in its depth. So this morning, I'm confidently and consciously on my own, not drawing on the wisdom of others, but on my own experience. And I'm definitely trying to do some convincing this morning. This is different for me. Stewardship comes from my heart. My presentation today is organized in 5 categories. The parable of the talents. We'll talk about why this makes us so uncomfortable sometimes. We'll play some word games, get into words and definitions and concepts. And I'll take some time to talk about 2 profound lessons that I've learned about stewardship. And we'll wrap it up with the topic of asking others for support. So let's get started. The parable of the talents. Those who know me well have likely heard me say that Jesus' parable of the talents, the most well-known of the stewardship parables, haunts me. It's with me every day. I think it's been there all my life. There are probably many reasons, some I'm aware of, others which I don't have a hint about. I suspect my good old traditional Midwest upbringing is a part of it. Being the oldest of 7 children certainly has an influence. My recognition while I was growing up, even in what was, in retrospect, a lower middle class at best household, I was blessed in many ways. And certainly the successes I've enjoyed in my professional career have been a part of that growing sense of stewardship. Somehow, I've always known that I am very fortunate and that responsibility came along with the blessings that I'd been given. So let's look at this parable together to see what haunts me about it. An introduction. Jesus told 24 different parables in the Gospels that are spread across the 4 Gospel books in the Bible. You know them, many of them: the prodigal son, the mustard seed, lost coin, the Good Samaritan. Parables were simple stories used to illustrate important, sometimes complex truths. Sometimes it's helpful for me to think of the biblical parables as versions of Aesop's fables that help me understand things that I would have a hard time dealing with before. So with that context, let's look at the most well-known parable, the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents is presented subtly differently in two different books. Matthew and Luke both have the parable of the talents in them, but they're slightly different. Matthew is more comfortable to read. Luke is actually easier to understand. You know the story. The master goes away and entrusts money to his servants. The servants deal with the money differently. 2 do very well, and 1 doesn't. The master comes back and welcomes those who managed the money with enthusiasm. The master damned the one who didn't manage the money well. So what's the moral of the story? What does it mean? In order to answer that question, I've taken the liberty of combining the Matthew and Luke versions of the opening of the story. Listen carefully. Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they, the disciples he was speaking with, supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. So he said, a nobleman went to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then return. He entrusted his property to his slaves and said to them, "Do business with these until I return." When he returned, having received royal power, he ordered those slaves to whom he had given money to be summoned so that he might find what they had gained. Put those words in context. It seems to be a favorite process of mine. Of the time Jesus told the story and the audience he was addressing, and what does it mean becomes pretty obvious. This was a parable that Jesus told to his disciples as he was preparing to enter Jerusalem, knowing that he was going to die. This is not a parable about the stewardship of money. This parable is about the stewardship of the gospel. This parable should help us understand that stewardship is about a lot more than money. Let's move on and examine, why does this make us so uncomfortable? Here's a summary of my personal assessment of the topic as it is viewed and dealt with in churches today. My experience as at the Presbyterian Foundation solidified my earlier impressions, and nothing I have experienced since has changed them. Almost every pastor I know, I'll leave room for you to decide who is and who isn't, does not like talking about stewardship. Fall pledge season has the highest demand for guest speakers of any time of year in most churches. I won't mention any names. Letters and emails have replaced what used to be visits and phone calls that happened during stewardship season. And it's fascinating to hang out with clergy and lay leaders who are relieved when stewardship season is over at last. And to hear the general agreement that we won't talk about this until next fall. Wow. Why does this make us so uncomfortable? It's easy. In our heads, the word stewardship is spelled with dollar signs, not the letter S. But stewardship, at its core, is not about money. But since we only talk about it when we have to, stewardship obviously has some sort of taboo attached to it. But we should acknowledge the centrality of stewardship in our faith every day. And we don't like talking about it or asking others for money for what actually are some pretty flimsy reasons. It may be because we're uncomfortable with our own decisions about what we give and what we do. It may be because we aren't really committed to the cause. And my favorite excuse is because it's just not my job or my calling. Pretty flimsy. Let's look at the two words, $ stewardship and letter S, stewardship, in the context of the words and the concepts that they convey. $ stewardship is conceived by people as their obligation to make a financial pledge to the church. They also see it as the word the church uses as a euphemism in place of fundraising. Those familiar with the Broadway musical and later movie Cabaret may remember one of the songs sung by the MC of the Kit Kat Club that fits the $ definition of stewardship category. Money, 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 money. But that's not what stewardship is about. Jim Hansen, a few weeks ago at an adult forum, said that stewardship is caring for something you possess but do not own. I think it's a fantastic definition of stewardship. In my language, the way I have expressed it to myself and occasionally to others, stewardship is accepting and acting on our responsibility for all that we have influence over and does or will impact others. Here's what too many faithful people think about when the word stewardship is mentioned. It's real simple. But here's what stewardship is really about. It's about serving God and parenting and caring for others and concern for the environment, maintaining your home, performing your job, standing up for the less fortunate, supporting education, following rules, honoring parents, giving to help important needs, giving to the church, giving out of your current income, leaving a legacy, teaching others stewardship beyond money, being an example to others, showing a willingness to sacrifice, and on and on. Two profound lessons. I have to get personal here, and that's not always easy for me. So bear with me if you would, please. I'm going to share two experiences that taught me profound lessons about stewardship. Both came during my time as president of the Presbyterian Foundation. And at least some of the people who have heard me tell these stories have been touched almost as deeply as I was in experiencing them. I'm going to talk about the clarity that comes when stewardship is understood, and the importance of teaching and encouraging stewardship from others. Clarity. As Foundation CEO, I was responsible not only for the day-to-day operation and results and strategic direction of the organization. I was regularly called on to talk with a wide array of church organizations, congregations, pastors, lay leaders, and donors. This is the story of one of those. In the late 1930s, a young logger somehow obtained title to several hundred acres of former forest land on the Northern California coast that he had just helped clear cut. Over the following 60 years, under the care of that young, then older, then much older logger, the land again had become a magnificent, mature forest. He knew that he wasn't going to live forever, and he cared about the land, and he wanted to figure out what to do with it, but he couldn't. He did not know what to do with that land. Should he sell it and do something with the money? Should he allow a logging company to clear cut it again, as had been done 60 years earlier? Should he pass it on to his children and let them figure out the whole thing? Or should he figure out a way to give it to one of the church organizations or other nonprofits who were at his door almost every day trying to get them to give it to him? Nothing satisfied him. He talked to his pastor. He talked to lay leaders in the community. He struggled deeply trying to figure out, what do I do with this? Finally, he talked to the Presbyterian Foundation representative who served that part of the country. And even his experience and wisdom didn't help the guy. He, in a fit of, I've got to do something, he said, I want to talk to your boss. So the message got transferred to me, and I said, of course. I got on an airplane in Louisville, Kentucky, and flew to California, and I was privileged to walk in that forest, on that mountain, for 2 days with that man. He told stories, and we laughed, and we cried, and we prayed as he struggled to put what he had been so carefully in charge of for all those years, all of his adult life, to figure out what to do with it. Towards the end of our second day together, I changed the topic, unintentionally as it turns out, from what do I do with this thing that I own, to what do I do with this thing that I've been the steward of for the last 60 years. And I apologize for the shake in my voice, but I feel this one as I tell it. As the idea of his stewardship of that land in the past and into the future evolved inside of his head and inside of his soul, the answer became instantly obvious. I could see the anxiety that this faithful servant of God had dealt with for between 5 and 10 years, as he told it, lift and evaporate from him. It's one of the few times in my life I have seen a person so happy that they glowed. Once he realized that this was about stewardship, not ownership, about caring for God's creation, not deciding who to give God's creation to, it became easy. He quickly created a perpetual trust that instructed the trustee that only the mature trees that were on the brink of being too old to continue as part of the forest could be harvested. And that the money that was gained by the environmentally responsible logging of that land should be given to a series of church and non-church related causes that he and his family cared deeply about. His realization and acceptance of his stewardship, not just ownership of that forest, made the answer he had struggled for years obvious in an instant. I have chills. It was a profound experience. My second lesson was different, but in its own way, equally profound. The Presbyterian Church Foundation Board of Directors had accepted a staff recommendation that we establish a $6 million endowment fund to help ensure that the organization could ongoing continue to serve the church in all its work. That was the slogan that the foundation used. The development effort was complicated, though. The foundation existed to serve the church by raising money for the church's causes. The idea of the church going out to the public saying, we want money to support us, was something that nobody could figure out how to deal with, because all of the people out there would see us in competition with them, not in support of them. So the universe of people that we could seek contributions to our endowment fund was very limited. Just internal donors, board members, former board members, staff. So it was a challenge, but we had an ace up our sleeves. Helen Walton, wife of the late Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, was on our board. It was my privilege to welcome Helen to my home on her trip to Louisville for the foundation's next board meeting, to ask her for her support. I didn't know how to do that or how much to ask her for in her contribution to the endowment. I knew that the Walton Family Foundation could write a check for $6 million in an instant and never miss it. I told her that I didn't know what to ask for or how to ask for it. And with the warmth and love of everybody's favorite aunt, and with the implicit joy of someone who has been greatly blessed, the twinkle in her eye, let me know it was okay that I had asked. She told me what she would do and why she would do it. The Walton family had learned over the years that encouraging and engaging others was as important to the long-term future of organizations and causes they cared about as their short-term impact of the contributions that they would make. Helen made a very meaningful and generous gift that left all the others with a responsibility to participate generously in order to meet the goal that we had all agreed to. Her contribution was very generous. The lesson she taught me, and let me tell to all the others, was worth even more. the participation of the entire board and staff of the organization, inspired by her gift and her lesson, that still required everyone else's participation to meet the goal, was truly inspiring. I'll move on to my last topic, asking others for support. I include this because it is a topic I'm regularly asked about, because sometimes it has helped take people deeper inside themselves and allow a fuller examine of their stewardship, and because it lets me share some interesting experiences I've had here at Living Water. Asking others for support. One of the most regular questions I have been asked since serving at the foundation is, how do I get people to contribute to fill in the blank? I've had the question here at Living Water. The answer is easy. Doing it the first time can be really hard. Doing it the second time and beyond that can be very easy. Here's what it takes. You have to demonstrate stewardship, even if you never mention the word. You have to care enough about the cause to have contributed yourself, significantly giving what you're asking for. You have to be willing to tell others why it's important, why you care, and what you have done. People drop quarters in the Salvation Army kettle without thinking about it. Many, perhaps most, write checks to causes that clearly make a difference when they know others who they respect have done so. You have to be willing to take no for an answer without being discouraged or taking it personally, because you're not responsible for other people's stewardship decisions. If you can't do these things, maybe it means you need to re-examine what stewardship means for you, or the cause means for you. I'm going to close this section with 3 of my experiences and observations here at Living Waters. I was once asked personally to contribute to a worthwhile but unpublicized cause. I did. I received absolutely no feedback about the effort or its success, until finally, out of frustration, I had to ask. Kathy, my wife, and I responded to a request for contribution made at the beginning of a worship service some time ago. When the cause that was discussed a few weeks later, we were somewhere between sad and disappointed that the announced total that was raised by the congregation for that specific cause was exactly the amount of the check that we had written. And finally, I'm aware of instances where not insignificant gifts have been made in which the givers, who certainly didn't contribute for recognition in any way, were never offered the words, "Thank you," formally or even informally. The presence of an attitude, "It's so hard to ask," in any organization can yield a response of, "Why would I want to give here?" from potential contributors. It's at this point that I particularly wish we were together so we could discuss this. I opened this presentation with comments about the parable of the talents. At my last meeting of the Presbyterian Foundation Board of Directors, a celebration of the Foundation's 200th anniversary, one of our board members, a pastor of a very large church in the Philadelphia area, preached the opening worship on that parable, since he and all the other in attendance knew how important it was to me. I was touched and enlightened by all he said. I was challenged and inspired by his closing thoughts that I share with you here. You can't just be good. You have to do good. You have to risk doing good. You have to imagine what it is like to serve and love a living Savior, and then act on it without any assurance as to whether or not you will be successful. And all the while knowing that in the end, you will be held accountable. Stewardship. Just thinking about it is a bit uncomfortable, but embracing it is liberating and exhilarating. I desperately wish we could talk about stewardship now. Hopefully we can do so soon. Thank you for listening and watching.